Hello, students of Paw Paw Middle School, 6th grade. My name is, of course, Mr. Barnhouse. I know you all know me, but you may not know of my love of British Columbia. So, if you're not open to page 166 of your book, you need to get there now, because we're going to go over the facts about British Columbia. Make sure you're paying attention. Yes, you over there, make sure you're paying attention, or else detention's for everyone. Not you, Mr. Thomasma. You, I like. Everyone else? Well, I like you too, except for that blonde girl over there. Make sure you're paying attention. Alright, first thing we need to look at is the key terms about British Columbia. A totem pole. We know a totem pole is a tall, carved pole containing the symbols of a particular native group, clan, or family. This is on page 166. Make sure you're following along. Also, we know that a boomtown is a settlement that springs up quickly to serve the needs of miners. Oh, alright. So we're going to read about British Columbia. When I say we, I mean I am going to read about British Columbia. Make sure you are following along. Also, make sure that you have your sheet in front of you to fill out as we go. Mr. Thomasman will stop from time to time in order for you to do this. A visitor. We're on page 166. Make sure you're following along. A visitor starts her day at a tiny coffee shop. All around her, people are speaking Dutch, Japanese, Spanish, German, and English. After having breakfast, the visitor gets into her car. On the radio, she hears country music, sung in French. Driving downtown, she passes street signs in Chinese, Indian men wearing turbans, a Korean travel agency, and a Thai restaurant. Where in the world is she? It may seem like the United Nations, but it is Vancouver. Whoa, back up. First off, raising your hands. Who can tell me what the United Nations is? Okay, so she's in Vancouver, British Columbia, a truly international city. As the largest city in British Columbia, Vancouver is the province's major center of industry, transportation, commerce, and culture. You can see on page 166 an example of some dancers in British Columbia. Alright, now, since I'm such a nice guy, right, Mr. Thomasma? Okay, glad you agree. Alright, since I'm a nice guy, I decided to get some guest speakers for today. So, make sure that you pay attention to the guest speakers as they continue reading, and I will be back at the end of class to ask you some more questions and to learn more about British Columbia. Hello, students of Paw Paw Middle School. My name is Robert Pattinson, and I am Edward Cullen from the Twilight series, and I am here to tell you about British Columbia and the people of Canada. I know you're excited to see me. Try to contain yourself, ladies. Alright, we will begin with the people of the Canadian West. The first people came to present-day British Columbia at least 10,000 years ago. That's older than some vampires you might know. They belonged to several ethnic groups and spoke many different languages. Each group had its own customs and a complex society. The people along the coast caught fish, whales, and shellfish. They also carved giant totem poles, or tall, carved poles containing the symbols of a particular group, clan, or family. Now, of course, that is a vocabulary word, so make sure you know it because you are going to have a test on it. Other groups lived and hunted game in the dense inland forest. Some people traded with one another and got along well. Others, they fought. Now, there was also some new arrivals that came after the natives. In the late 1700s, Spanish, British, and Russian explorers arrived in the area to trade. In 1778, James Cook, a British explorer, sailed to Vancouver Island off the coast of British Columbia. A group of Nootka people met the British and agreed to trade. These coastal people wanted iron tools, while the British wanted furs. When the British built a fur trading post on the island, trade between the two groups began to flourish. Trade changed the indigenous people's lives a great deal. Although fur traders did not permanently settle the area, they introduced tools, European-style clothing, and ideas. In 1858, everything changed. Gold was discovered along the Fraser River. Oh, the Fraser River.
The Pacific Coast region has a rich and fascinating history, and it all started well before the first people of European descent began to settle here. The coastal areas of southern Alaska, Washington, and Oregon were places where Northwest Indian tribes developed a very distinctive Native American culture. In their ceremonies, Members of these tribes wore fantastic wooden masks depicting wild animals. They lived in wooden houses like this one, and decorated them with brilliantly colored designs. These Native Americans also carved huge totem poles out of logs, and in rivers and streams like this one in Washington State, they fished for salmon, upon which they depended for most of their food.
Hello, everybody. My name is Taylor Lautner, and of course, you're all on Team Jacob, correct? Well, I hope you are on Team Jacob, because Team Edward... Anyways, I'm here to tell you about the gold rush in British Columbia. So, this is on page 169. The gold rush. A few years earlier, the British had established Victoria, a trading village on Vancouver Island. It was a small town of traders and farmers. Then, one Sunday morning in April 1858, an American paddle-wheeler entered Victoria's harbor. It dropped off more than 400 men. They carried packs, blankets, spades, pickaxes, knives, and pistols. These rugged-looking characters had come to mine gold in the area. In a single morning, Victoria's population had more than doubled. Within weeks, tens of thousands more miners had arrived. Victoria quickly became a stump town. All of its great trees had been chopped down to build shacks and boats. The town served as a supply center for the miners who were looking for gold on the Fraser River. 2 years later, miners also struck gold in the Caribou Mountains in eastern British Columbia. Another wave of miners came from China, Europe, and the United States. The region was far from the coast and hard to reach, so the government built a 400-mile highway to it. Almost overnight, boomtowns, oh, it's in blue, boomtowns, or settlements that were built to serve the needs of the miners, sprang up along the road. When the gold rush was over, many boomtowns died out. Now, Mr. Thomasman told me the other day that you guys have already talked about boomtowns. Raising your hands, what boomtowns have you talked about before? Now, all of these changes brought about some changes for the indigenous people. So all these boomtowns and stuff. Alright, so on page 169, changes for the indigenous people. The thousands of settlers who arrived were taking gold from the indigenous people's lands, even taking over the land itself. In 1888, the British government took steps to confine some indigenous people to a small reserve. The indigenous people protested. Before we go on, who can tell me what an indigenous person is? Alright, good. The reserve was located on land that they had always lived on. How, they asked, could a government now give it to them? That does not make much sense. Flip the page to page 170. Like indigenous people throughout Canada, they had little choice. In a few short years, Native people had gone from being the great majority to being the smallest minority of the population. They were pushed into small reserves. The government passed laws banning many of their customs, religious, and languages. Ooh, not nice, especially since I myself am an indigenous person, since I am a member of the whatever tribe of Washington. Authorities took children from their parents and placed them in government-run schools. Recently, the indigenous people of British Columbia have found new pride in their history and culture. Their art is thriving. They are also demanding political rights in the land. As a result, tension has developed between indigenous people and other British Columbians. For example, in 1999, the Chinook Indians were awarded thousands of acres of land northwest of Vancouver and more than 40 million Canadian dollars. Many people felt that these terms were too generous. In July 2002, residents of British Columbia voted to place limits on native land claims. Now, of course, British Columbia is located near what state? Just a hint. My character, Jacob, he is from that state. Oof. Go Team Jacob, ladies. Try to contain yourself. Alright, I'm much better than Edward, don't you think? Yeah.
The Canadian Pacific Railway. British Columbia officially joined Canada in 1871. One of the conditions of joining was that a transcontinental railroad would be built within 10 years. Construction began in 1875, but little progress was made until 1881. That spring, Canadians began work on the enormous project of building a railroad that would stretch from Montreal to Vancouver. The goal of the project was to unite Canada. Look at the physical map of Canada on page 4, and you can see what a huge task this was. There were countless obstacles, soaring mountains, steep valleys, and glaciers. Workers built bridges and blasted long tunnels through the mountains. The railroad project brought more change to Canada. There were not enough workers available to complete the railway on schedule. Thousands of immigrants, particularly from Ireland and China, came to work on the railroad. Towns grew up along the railroad, and more newcomers moved in. In a few short years, British Columbia changed from a sparsely inhabited region to a settled one, complete with cities. Reading check. Why was the Canadian Pacific Railway built?
Alright, I'm back. Now, the economics and culture is my favorite part of British Columbia, so make sure you're paying attention, and you're on page 171. Although the Canadian Pacific Railroad connects all of Canada, the mountains are a barrier between British Columbia and the rest of Canada. Today, most British Columbians live along the coast, west of the mountains. Many of them feel that their economic future lies with the other countries more than the rest of Canada. Why do you think it lies with other countries? Raise your hands. Yeah, you too, raise your hand.
At the westernmost edge of Canada, separated from the rest of the country by the Canadian Rockies, sits British Columbia. Bordered by Alberta to the east, the United States to the south, the Pacific Ocean to the west, and the Yukon and Northwest Territories to the north, British Columbia's location allowed it to quickly develop as a center for trade. Stretching inland from the rocky coastline, the landscape changes dramatically. More than half of the province is covered with forests. The abundant natural resources of British Columbia, wildlife, minerals, and timber, are what first attracted fur trappers, gold prospectors, and loggers. The creation of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1885 transformed shipping in Canada. The city of Vancouver was westernmost, and it quickly became the leading center for industry and finance in British Columbia. It was well positioned as a port for ships sailing the Pacific. From here, goods were shipped to the rest of Canada. British Columbia is located on the Pacific Rim, which includes the countries in and along the Pacific Ocean. Most of Canada's trade with Asia and the Pacific Rim goes through Vancouver's port. British Columbia's coal fuels Japanese and South Korean steel mills. Forests, another important natural resource, cover over 50% of British Columbia. Lumber and paper products are a leading export. Warm breezes from the Pacific Ocean create a relatively mild climate in Vancouver. The water in the harbor never freezes, so ships can dock here all year long, even during the brutally cold winters that affect other parts of Canada. About a third of the total population of British Columbia lives in Vancouver. Many Asians live in Vancouver. Chinatown is a bustling part of the city, brimming with markets, restaurants, and shops.